our HRTPO quadrennial federal certification review. Our team's really, this might sound odd, but we're excited. It's because we have a lot of great information to share with you. We look forward to great conversations about our program, and then of course, most importantly, how we can improve. So I'm really looking forward to the dialogue over the next day and a half. What I thought I'd do is just talk a little bit about some logistics, and then Ivan, I'm going to turn it over to you and Chelsea. But first off, important things, right? So if you make your way out that door there and go to the left, both restrooms are located there in the corner. We have blocked off room F, which when you go out that door is immediately to the right. So if you need some quiet space, if the federal team needs a chance to get together and discuss items, if anybody needs to make some phone calls, if you have a quiet space to go ahead and do that, feel free to close the door and get some privacy if you need it, because I know it could be there's a lot to go over in a day and a half, right? Okay, Wi-Fi passwords are on both sides of the room, so they give you a chance to access that. All right, so in terms of our setup, we work with our federal partners and selected this room because our 757 room, of course, has the opportunity to stream, and we're doing that on Teams. In the ceiling are our microphones and our speakers, so as long as you project, we do a lot of meetings in here. It will project, and they're very sensitive, so it will pick you up, and people from home will be able to hear and participate. This morning, I think we do have a couple members of the public. Predominantly what you have are a lot of our staff members. We didn't want to fill up the room because as the day goes on, we're going to have transit partners and other partners coming in, and that will give everybody a chance to be at the table and have a good and engaged conversation. We do have, and this is another option for you, if you just need to maybe stretch or go check your laptop in another room, we set up our big meeting room, A and B, as sort of an overflow area, but also we're streaming in there on the screen as well. So if the public would come in or any partners come in early, or if you all just need a break, that's another option for you over there. We have snacks outside on the table. Please help yourself. Our team will be bringing in coffee and juice and drink throughout the day. So just to stress, we're here to help support you all. Please let us know what you need. Pavitra, first off, I think everybody knows our Deputy Executive Director, Dr. Pavitra Parthasarathi. Pavitra, anything you wanted to add?
No, just again, thank you all for being here, and if there's anything we can do while you're here for the day for more, please let us know.
So, Ivan, if you're okay with sort of a around-the-room introduction and then turn it over to you, and we can get going.
Absolutely. I guess I can start with myself. Good morning, everyone. Many of you know me. I am Ivan Rucker, Statewide Planning Trade Program Manager for Federal Highway Administration, Virginia Division Office. Hampton Roads is one of the regions that I am responsible for, in addition to Richmond. But I've been pretty much involved at the table since 2000. I guess you could say since I arrived here in Virginia off of the Federal Highway Training Program, but joined Federal Highway in 1997. Prior to that, I worked at a company called Patel, based in Columbus, Ohio, in the area of ITS. And prior to that, I worked as an assistant transit planner with the Maryland Mass Transit Administration. My hometown is Maryland. I appreciate being here. Well,
good morning, everyone. My name is Chelsea Bezos. I'm with FTA Region 3, based in Philadelphia. Just an overview, our office serves transit agencies, state DOTs, and MPOs in Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, and DC. I joined FTA about 4 years ago, started my assignments in Pennsylvania, and since then have moved to be the full planner of West Virginia, and then areas in Western Virginia, and now, in addition to that, Hampton Roads. So thank you for welcoming the federal team. Once we go around the circle, I can give a little bit more about the process of the certification review. Thank you.
I'm Rob Case. I'm Chief Transportation Engineer here at the HRTPO.
Hi again, Pavitra Parthasarathi, HRTPO.
Good morning again, Bob Crum, HRTPO and HRPDC.
Good morning, Quan McLaurin with the HRPVC, HRTPO.
Good morning, Dinah Oliver, VDOT Programming Director.
Good morning, Keisha Wilkins, planner with the VDOT Hampton Roads District.
Good morning, Angela A. Fonponsa. I'm the Assistant District Planner, currently Acting District Planner with VDOT.
Morning, Marcia Theo with the VDOT Central Office, Transportation and Floodplain Division.
Carolyn Tanner, Senior Civil Rights Specialist with VDOT, with Ms.
Queen Crittenden, Hampton Roads District Civil Rights Manager.
Good morning, Dale Stith, I'm with the HRTPO.
Keith Nichols also here at the HRTPO.
And John Mahaley here at the HRTPO.
Mark A.
Mark A. Hall, IT Manager here at the Rose PDC. Just for note, please be aware we are streaming live, and I know we're in a small space, so we feel as though, we're talking amongst each other, but just please be aware that we do have listeners on the outside, so if you could just talk a little bit elevated and clear. Thank you.
Jeff Lewinsky, HRTPO.
Matt Klopaz, HRPDC and TPO.
All right. Great. And we do, we honor our virtual guests. Okay, so first off, thank you all for being here. Thank you to HRTPO and HRPDC staff for the work that has gone in prior to the site visit, which includes the bringing forth the documents to review, for our desk review, for coordinating the actual site visit dates, for additional coordination throughout the past several months. It's been a while, I guess, since we started. And thank you for VDOT members for joining. Thank you, dear PT, I see Tiffany. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to those from the transit agencies joining us later in the day. Regarding the guidelines, I think many are familiar with etiquette, joining remotely, and thank you, Mark, for mentioning to be mindful of the virtual attendees in this room, making sure we speak, and that most conversation should go towards the discussion at hand, the related topics. So first, why are we here? So it is federal law that once every 4 years, areas that are in a population larger than 200,000, the regional population, that there is a certification review that's conducted jointly by Federal Highway Administration and FTA. So this certification review is for the Virginia Beach, Virginia urbanized area, and the transportation management area, which is at 200,000 population destination. Now, the certification review, the process ensures that the planning requirements, the federal planning requirements, are being carried out by the MPO that's designated to plan for that region. Now, this certification review will include not only Virginia Beach, but also the planning area of HRTPO, which extends to Williamsburg and Suffolk. Through coordination with the MPO, there is a public involvement section related to the certification review. That public involvement meeting is scheduled for 6 to 8 p.m. tonight. In addition to that public involvement section, there is also a meeting with the Community Advisory Committee that will take place from noon to 2. So with the desk review of the documents that we requested months ago, That, along with discussion today and the input that we received from members of the public now, and then our discussions with the public and the CAC, those will come together for a joint report that the federal team will be writing and will be issuing at the end of the certification review process. That report is accompanied by certifying the planning process in the region. And with that, there will be, that's related to 3 federal findings that we could have related to the transportation planning process in the Hampton Roads region. So those 3 findings, first are accommodations, which are items that the MPO does exceptionally well and can be precedents for other MPOs to follow. There's recommendations which note that the federal requirements are being met, but there's room for improvement to make the process or products better. And then there's corrective actions, and those come when federal requirements aren't being met and it's a higher degree of those recommendations. So once the site visit's concluded, we will continue to work on that report. We'll be in touch if we have any questions related to that. The deadline to get the certification review reapproved is November 20th, so before Thanksgiving. And so the report and the approval letter should be out before then. And again, we'll coordinate if we have any questions. Before that report is issued, there will be an opportunity for Hampton Roads to review that report. That includes the federal findings. We call that the factual review. And so that could be expected probably sometime, probably October. We'll allow some time for the, not only the MPO, but state DOT to also review and make sure that what we capture in our report is correct. So we appreciate in advance your review of documents. And lastly, we offer the opportunity for the federal team to summarize the certification process, the findings at a then future MPO meeting. So that would be after November 20th, after that report is issued. So at this time, are there any questions relating? Yes.
Sorry, I meant to mention this earlier, but just for everyone's awareness, the Teams meeting is also being recorded, and so will all of our other sessions.
Thank you, Juan. Yes, that was a request to make sure that when we review, we do capture things correctly if we have questions. Great. We did issue the agenda at the end of July. I don't know if everyone that's been distributed. Okay, great.
Additional copies on the table too.
Okay.
Anyone needs it?
If there's any questions right now, are there any questions right now on the agenda regarding the agenda? Okay. So, let's see. Running a little. Okay, with that, anything else?
We'll add, we have an internal handshake when it comes to certification reviews where we transition back and forth in terms of who's leading the certification review. So in this case, it is FTA's turn to take the lead with respect to Hampton Roads. I will add that Chelsea did mention kind of sort of the category of findings, and one of those being recommendations. It's important to pay attention to those recommendations because in some instances, those recommendations can turn into corrective actions if not addressed. So please, I know Chelsea mentioned that recommendations. Some people say, well, you know, it may not be necessary. It's optional, but it really is important to pay attention to those recommendations.
Thank you, Ivan. There is I think attendance was, and she just.
Yeah, it's here.
Okay. Okay, great, thank you. That's one thing we have in the report is who attends, and both for the record and then to show that this meeting did happen. Great, so let's get into the first discussion of the day, which is agreements, MPO structure, and coordination. And sorry, I should have asked earlier, I think Hampton Roads, there is a presentation related to each topic? Or how,
Yeah, this one is, we don't have a presentation,
Okay.
but the following sessions, each one has a presentation from the staff.
okay, great, and something like this.
Yeah. I'll just say that for the last certification review, there were several recommendations identified in the report. What we'll do is we'll capture the results and discuss those recommendations as we touch on each topic area. Probably going to be the best approach.
And those recommendations are within the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, Transit Planning, Transportation Improvement Program, and Civil Rights.
And I will add that the MPO was fully certified. Great job.
We'll start with the agreements. I was able to review the agreements between the MPO, the Planning District Commission, between VDOT and DRPT, as well as those with the pass-through of FTA funds to the transit agencies, and then the expansion of the service area to Franklin and Southampton County. Regarding the agreements, how does how does the MPO ensure that the agreements are current, that the provisions still work for each agency, and that if there's any changes that are, and to identify if changes are needed?
So maybe I'll start with
Like, is
that.
there a review process of the agreements that exist, and what would that review process look like?
So Chelsea, I think that happens probably in two ways. I think as practitioners, as the staff team, we're reviewing the agreements on an ongoing basis. Frankly, they're a bit committed to memory, right? But we review them as we go through our work and experiences with those agreements in terms of understanding how they apply, and then if anything would need to be addressed. Those are typically the type of things that we would start through the process. Typically, that process begins with the TTAC, involving the advisory committee, make its way through the board. Other times, and Ivan, probably the great example is consultation with planning partners like FHWA. Ivan, back in 2016, we worked together, and FHWA brought to us a deficiency that we had. And that spurred the effort that we brought in portions of the city of Franklin and Southampton County as part of the MPA Metropolitan Planning Area. We have that same relationship with VDOT as well in terms of that work on an ongoing basis. So, I don't believe that we don't have a scheduled formal time that says, this month every year we review them. It's more just something that we're monitoring on an ongoing basis.
Sure, Chelsea, some of our agreements you'll notice on the desk audit, and I have Jeff in the back, he's our point person on many of those. Our PL, SPR, DRPT, pass-through, those are every year, every time, it just happens. It's on a regular basis. But some of the agreements, Franklin, Southampton was done previously. They are members of our TPO board, so it's a little different. So some are more on an annual basis. Every time a UPWP, rural transportation, SPR, everything gets done every year. And that's what you'll see on the information we provided. Some just go through annually and some are more,
Yeah, I know with the performance-based planning and programming, those were issued by many agencies in 2018, and so those kind of coordinations. I did notice for the master agreement with VDOT that there were some provisions that mentioned communication, both in section 6 and in 10, that communication was to be done only through postal mail. So looking at working in a, I guess, post-COVID world, does that still meet the region's needs, the state DOT's needs? And that would be financial reports. It mentioned that those were to be mailed annually, 6 months after the end of the year. And then section 10, when there's any changes to the agreements, also to be changed through only mail options.
So I think we have adapted. So for example, some of our products used to be mailed. Now we make sure it's email as well. And our partners have been very helpful in that regard. I think you will hear from that we are over communicating rather than not communicating. So they will get the mail, they will get an email, they'll get a follow-up from staff. So we understand this was done in a pre-COVID world, but yeah, we've tried to make those changes. So our communication and collaboration and partnership with our VDOT, our transit and DRPT and any of our other partners, it doesn't stop just because the agreement said it needs to be. I think that's something we're very cognizant of.
Would you see, I guess, incorporating email, does it still work in having the requirements of just through postal mail? In terms of, you're saying, yes, we're going beyond the agreement, but when would that trigger maybe the agreement needs to be revised?
You're talking about the the VDOT agreement from 2018?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we do review that every 5 years, that's reviewed.
Okay.
And then on an annual basis, we have a letter of authorization. We are looking at reviewing that agreement in about a year.
I guess the review schedule for the master agreement is 5 years. So I don't know if there was like an ad hoc update as well.
Amendments to the agreement?
I was just thinking, if there was a change that was needed, if there was a different situation that came up, would those changes be made at that point or just wait until the 5-year update cycle begins?
If it's a significant change, we make it. Okay. If there was a problem with the way things are working, it was going to stop.
Okay.
It is still working.
When was that agreement last executed?
The one for us was September 20.
That was the,
Three C agreement. 3C agreement, 2018. The 3C agreement?
yeah, the master agreement was just days before COVID started. So that's why it's like, okay, is that happening? Offices are closed, are the mail, and then just making sure those agreements are kept to date. And yes, what I've heard from other MPOs is we know the MPO, state DOTs, transit agencies know what is expected of them, and they're doing the work that's outlined in the agreement. But if the agreement's old, then, I mean, that's something that should be updated, should be, yes, a living document and not just, oh, yeah, hey, it's good to know the agreements, it's good to follow through on that, but then you have the document mean something.
I think at the time of COVID, everything started, or everything stopped, we all had to pitch it, you know, and make whatever accommodations we had to make to get the work done, and to keep things flowing. And we had already been done, doing a lot of meetings virtually, and public input virtually, so we were, you know, it was a little bit ahead of the game, preparing for that. So we found that has actually worked out very well, especially in public involvement. That's been expanded. Significant improvement in our public involvement because of the virtual opportunities.
Pardon me, sorry, just a housekeeping item. Some members of the virtual participants are having a hard time hearing us. If we could try to project as loud as possible to make sure that not only the public can hear us and those attending virtually, but also so that the recording can pick up the audio as well. If you think that you're talking too loud, probably not loud enough, all right? So try to project across the room so that all the mics can pick you up. Sorry for the interruption.
Nobody will think we're yelling at each other, so. That's cool.
You know, I just want to add on to what Chelsea was saying in terms of the agreements being a living document, significance of the need to update them. As we know, and I'm looking at the topic, financial constraint and financial forecasts, we have an organization called the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission that are responsible for, in many cases, financial forecasting. I'm assuming, is that correct? And in terms of, there's a direct connection with the forecasting as well as the development of planning products, financial plans, forecasts that are contained, for example, the long-range transportation plan, looking out beyond 20 years. So like I say, they're a big part of the process now. Maybe perhaps as you consider updating your agreements, maybe perhaps in the fiscal constraint financial forecast section, mentioning their role, their responsibilities in terms of providing the assistance needed for the MPO to help build the project list as well as develop the long-range transportation plan. I just wanted to add.
And Ivan, just real quick on the fiscal constraint. We still get our main long-range forecast from VDOT. Obviously, HRTAC is critical with the regional funds, so they're informing that regional forecast part, but in terms of the bulk of our forecast is still coming from VDOT.
We'll talk a little bit more because I think there's other regional organizations like the Regional Transit organization that's also providing you with revenue forecasts. So there's lots of players in the game down here. So,
And if I may, I just follow up. So for HRTAC, in terms of the work that they do in coordination with Dell, to Ivan's point, for all of our partners, there would be two areas that they have really important input for those financial forecasts. First is the Hampton Roads Regional Transportation Fund, the HRTF as we call it locally, which is our regional gas tax and our regional sales and use tax. And just to review again as a reminder, those funds must be used on projects that offer maximum congestion relief for the Hampton Roads residents in our PDC area. The second now, Ray, and that's good news, and we'll talk about that more, is they also manage the Hampton Roads Regional Transportation Fund, which is the HRTIP. So for the first time in our region, we have a dedicated funding source for transit that equates to somewhere in the neighborhood, let's call it 30 million a year in round numbers. And that input comes from our HRTAC partners as well. And we can talk more about that HRTIF a little later. So.
Going back to the documents, the planning agreements being living documents, just to keep in mind too that any items referenced as attachments or appendices should be included. I did see a couple missing signatures on those documents, and similar to other contract agreements, are they in place if not all parties sign?
Chelsea, I know are you referring to the 2018 where the Secretary of Transportation wasn't witnessed? Is that?
One thing is, is a witness required? There's also one for the fiscal year 2024 5303 project agreement between DRPT and the MPO. That one did not have signature from DRPT. And so maybe it's HRT didn't have a copy of the form from DRPT, but making sure that each agency does have signed copies from both parties, appendices that are referenced should be in there. The SPRPL funding agreement 2024 did not have, I did not see attachment number 2 of that form, and maybe it just wasn't included in the version I have.
The attachment 2 you're referring to, it's because it's personnel and salaries.
Okay, so
That is something that are, just because it's salaries, it's private.
And Chelsea, to your point, the 2018 agreement was signed and witnessed by everyone except the secretary. It just wasn't witnessed. It was signed by the secretary, so we could get that.
Again, it's good that the parties are following through with the agreement, but making sure that the documents are valid, that's important as well. In reviewing the we noticed regarding Hampton Roads and the committees and seeing which committees had bylaws, it appeared that only the MPO, TTAC, Community Advisory Council, and Freight committees had bylaws, and other committees and subcommittees did not. Is that the case?
So our TPO board, our TTAC, CAC, and FTAC, they all have bylaws. The subcommittees are subcommittees of TTAC, so they kind of fall under the TTAC bylaws.
Okay.
So like our long-range transportation plan, our transportation programming committee, our HRTO, traffic, all of them fall under TTAC, so the TTAC bylaws is what they fall under. But TTAC, CAC, and FTAC are advisory committees of our board, and they all
so there's no bylaws for the Chief Administrative Officer Committee, the Regional Transit Advisory Panel, and the Transportation Advisory Committee?
So the CAO committee is a subcommittee of the HRPBC. So they follow the FOIA laws and the public body meeting requirements of publics, and have done so since mid-2015.
Sorry, since 2015 was?
When I arrived.
Sorry.
When I arrived, we took the input received from the previous certification review and immediately made. And the Regional Transit Advisory Panel, we operate as a public body, but because it's a public participation group with a broader range of community stakeholders of over 50 people. We follow Robert's rules of order, and in terms of those operating procedures, we live stream all the meetings. And we conduct them as a public body meeting, but we don't have bylaws specifically, no. I chair those meetings as a facilitator based on the appointment of the RTAP membership. It's really a community advocacy committee.
We're talking about the RTAC.
Regional Transit Advisory Panel, yes, sir.
We have advocacy committee.
Yes, sir.
That committee was required by state statute, state code.
That's correct.
I'm sorry, so in terms of the chair, decision-making structure, committee, is there a decision-making structure for that committee? You're serving as the chair. Is there a vice chair?
There is not. It's a
The decision-making structure.
So the RTAP is not structured to make decisions. The RTAP provides advice and advocacy for public transportation.
They are an advisory committee to the Hampton Roads TPO.
Yes, sir, and the community overall. And an advocate for public transit would be the best way that I would describe that.
I was wondering whether or not you can maybe pull up a map of the region. As we mentioned earlier, there are many regional transportation boards, committees in the Hampton Roads region. We'll talk a little bit about that keyword region, because for some boards, region is defined differently. And in terms of, sorry,
That's right, we'll get it.
but in terms of, you know,
HRTPO.org. Oh, you don't have the keyboard. Sorry.
sorry to catch you off guard here.
That's
It's all
okay.
But in terms of areas of responsibility, in terms of borders, for example, what if you can walk us through those jurisdictions that are comprised of certain boards, certain committees, beginning with the, call it a regional transit committee. What is the geographic coverage of the regional transit committee? Is that, do they cover the entire region? Do they cover certain jurisdictions? I'm sorry, let's talk about that organization
So
first.
the title formed by the General Assembly was the Regional Transit Advisory Panel. And what happened was that when we were advocating for a dedicated source of transit funding for Hampton Roads Transit and the Hampton Roads region, there was a lot of deliberation, as you can imagine. And there was a lot of consensus building that had to occur. The sources of funding for the Hampton Roads Regional Transit Fund came from two sources. First, $20 million per year off the top of the statewide recordation tax. And why I mention that is, as you can imagine, that got the attention of the real estate community, right, statewide. And in addition, a transit occupancy tax for the HRT localities, which is basically 1% on the hotel tax, right? So for every $100 paid for a hotel room, $1 went into the fund. Collectively, that created $30 million per year, approximately. Why I provide that input is there was a lot. It went down to the end of the General Assembly, to the Saturday night, right? And the consensus that was reached was that people agreed to support, with a lot of stakeholders up in Richmond advocating either side, people agreed to support our regional transit fund, that the condition that they wrote onto it was that the HRTPO shall establish a regional transit advisory panel composed of representatives of major business and industry groups, employers, shopping destinations, institutions of higher education, military installations, sorry, just to get them all out there, hospitals and healthcare centers, public transit entities, and any other groups identified as necessary to provide ongoing advice to the regional planning process prescribed in the Code of Virginia on the long-term vision for a multimodal public transit network in Hampton Roads. Sorry for reading.
No, that's fine. So the multimodal network part of Hampton Roads, that the regional transit advisory panel, which will cover every jurisdiction that is shaded on this map, correct?
Yes,
The regional transit committee, does that cover every shaded area, or does that cover certain counties? You mentioned HRT, the counties that Hampton Roads Transit are responsible for, but it's defined as a regional committee.
That's correct. We work very hard to have entire region representation. We started with, and it's a great question, Ivan, because we started with all of the transit agencies from the start, from WADA to Suffolk to HRT, that brought in representation from across the spectrum from those localities. So now, what we very much did here was bring in community stakeholders and others that are important to have a voice at the table. What we feel was a very inclusive manner. So, for instance, when Norfolk Airport was involved, Newport News International has a seat, right? We always balance that South Side, Peninsula, and our representation is very broad. And what I would recommend, and I think, our transit agencies can really give the perspective on the value that they placed on this group, because Ray, I haven't seen a group quite this strong in promoting transit in a region that perhaps historically hasn't accepted it as much as we should have.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We'll probably have some more discussion on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Just-
'Cause I think one thing was.
To continue discussion on the responsibilities for organizations that have a role in transportation related decisions. And I appreciate you sharing the structure of not just RTAP, but also the Regional Transit Committee. Again,
I was referring to RTAP.
which we're talking, okay,
Regional Transit
we'll talk about the Regional Transit Committee, which is a different, they're responsible for a different geographic region. I'm hearing that in terms of just the seven cities that comprise. That's a regional transit.
Are you talking about the Regional Transit Coordination Working Group, Ivan?
I think that's
The coordination working group, but we're 7 mayors or 7 jurisdictions, elected officials. We'll talk a little bit about this transit, because I see some documentation that mentions the Regional Transit Committee, and during the discussion on transit, we'll talk a little bit about that group to get more clarification. So we'll table that.
We do have a slide on that, so.
Okay, good.
We got a slide for every season.
I appreciate it. So
Lots of slides.
We also, for this region, have, saying this will also benefit Chelsea, for the benefit of others who may not know, organizational Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. Those are organizations that are considered to be political subdivisions of the Commonwealth of Virginia that come together to respond to regional issues such as transportation. Then, of course, you have the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization, which is required by federal statute. In terms of areas of responsibility for both of those organizations, or shall I say both of those boards, the structure of the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission would include all of the jurisdictions that we're seeing shaded.
Plus, plus Surrey.
Plus Surrey County. The responsibilities for, or the boundaries for the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization is much smaller than the boundaries for the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. And they would include not necessarily all of the shaded areas, or part of the shaded areas for certain counties and cities.
That's correct. We can show that real quick here. Yeah, but you're absolutely right, Ivan. Yes. That's
So in terms of just looking at the non-shaded areas, in terms of board responsibility, what board would be responsible for transportation related activities for those areas that are not shaded versus the areas that are shaded?
So if I may, one thing before we get into that, we also have a uniqueness in Hampton Roads where the Code of Virginia permits localities to be co-members of different planning district commissions. So for instance, up in the Richmond area, Chesterfield belongs to Richmond, but they also belong to Crater.
Right.
Okay. In Hampton Roads, Surrey's home planning district commission is Crater Planning District Commission, but they choose to be a co-member with us voluntarily. The same thing with Gloucester County. Their home planning district commission is Middle Peninsula, but they choose to be a member of our PDC as a co-member as well. Back to your question, Ivan. The responsibilities in Southampton, the rural areas of Southampton, and in Surrey and in the rural areas of Gloucester fall under the Planning District Commission. That they are voting members of those boards, of the HRPDC.
And in terms of transportation-related decisions, the discretion for those activities fall within the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. The non-shaded part and the shaded part in terms of discretion, because of the boundary that has been agreed upon between the MPO, the state, and as well as the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, those responsibilities fall within the HRTPO, which is the MPO, or the Metropolitan Planning Organization. Okay. Thank you.
Anything you wanted to add to that?
Ivan, I'm just not sure I completely follow that, so I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So Franklin and Southampton, who was assigned to us, our Hampton Roads PDC, they are also, because we have slivers in the MPA, they're also full members of our TPO board. So when it comes to transportation, Franklin and Southampton, we're coordinating with them through our TPO committees and the TPO board. And Gloucester is the same way because they're full members of the TPO board, where Surrey is not on the TPO board. So anything transportation related that we would be doing with Surrey would be through the PDC board.
No, I appreciate that. One of the things that I mentioned is that HRPDCs are for Virginia, PDCs, shall I say, in Virginia, established by state code. They are political subdivisions of Commonwealth of Virginia, responsible for coming together to address issues of regional importance, environment, housing, and in code, one of those being transportation. So with respect to the HRPDC, meaning the area that is not shaded, does HRPDC as a board have transportation responsibilities? Does the HRPDC, as a political subdivision of the Commonwealth of Virginia, responsibility for addressing regional issues such as the environment, such as housing, again, such as transportation, all of those significant areas that are captured in state code, is a function of the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, just like other PDCs in the Commonwealth of Virginia, is a function of, is a transportation function.
No, it's not I understand your question, Ivan, if I may. So first off, the Code of Virginia is enabling, right? So there's a long list of things PDCs can do. Most PDCs don't do the breadth of programs that we do here. So each, when it says transportation, that's optional. PDCs may do that, just like they may do housing or environment. Or for instance, we're doing crime and violence prevention, which is the only, when we do sea level rise, other PDCs, that's not their challenge. Related to our structure, all of us are in this room, well, not me, didn't want to make you PDC employees, but all of us in the room, from the PDC and TPO, we're all PDC staff. Some of us, though, have.
You're employed by the PDC.
Yes, sir. But some of us have assignments to support the HRTPO board, and some of us have assignments to support the PDC board, and some of us do both. How we approach rural transportation planning is we very much want to treat our rural partners like we treat our urban partners, which is we're going to give them the best service we possibly can. And for me in this building, when that means who I assign to go to rural Southampton County and the non-urbanized area of Franklin and Surrey and Gloucester, I send them my transportation professionals. I send them Dell and her team. And why I do that is, just as Greg has water resource people who are the best at that in the building, Dell, and I say this to her all the time, she's the best in the building at doing transportation planning. So we assign her to work with her team in that rural area. So she's PDC staff, but in this case, she has the hat on as a transportation professional, working with our rural partners on their rural plans. We've and we can go through. Dale has a very nice overview of that program that we really love, and the bit of that Ivan addresses, I think, the questions you and Chelsea are asking, because she can walk through for you what those arrangements look like between us, how we've responded to previous comments, which were very helpful for us about getting, those UPWPs, that program incorporated, et cetera.
Generally speaking, though, in terms of board decision-making structure, the boards that make decisions for areas that are shaded, and the board that makes decisions for the areas that are not shaded. Are they different boards? Are they same boards with respect to transportation-related activities?
They would be different boards.
A different board, okay.
But the PDC, because we do incorporate the work program into the PDC for the rural, because as you know, it's important for those localities to have that ability to approve. But they are different boards. Clearly, the TPO board is the urban board.
The MPO is the policy board is aware that they've entered into an agreement where it defines its boundary, or shall I say its sphere of influence. That boundary is pretty much aligned with this map, and it has been agreed to by the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, in this case, the Secretary of Transportation, acting on behalf of the governor, Metropolitan Planning Organization, as well as the transit organization. So in this case, the NPO has defined the boundary in which it's going to conduct its business. So we have a defined boundary. Then you have the area outside of its boundary. meaning the MPO has concluded that this is not an area that, as a policy board, we're going to be responsible for. Question is, for that area that is outside of the metropolitan planning area boundary that's been agreed upon, is that responsibility in terms of transportation decision-making? Is the board responsible for that, the PDC?
So I would say yes, where it's appropriate. And this is why I say that, because I think this is important to bring up when I say this. Yes, that they approved the UPWP, right? They approved the work program. But frankly, rural transportation planning many times, Dale, is a local issue, right? And when I said when it's appropriate, it's hardly fair to take a proposal for a local road in rural county to a 17 locality board, 47 members, and throw it out for a vote. And we want to be careful, right? Because those localities, they need to drive that, right? Those host localities, the rural Southamptons, the rural Gloucesters, and even the rural Surreys, it's really important. And that's why you tailor your input and your work with them to represent those local policy decisions. Would that be fair?
I appreciate that. I'm not gonna, we'll have some additional discussion in the next section when we talking about UPWPs and areas of responsibility, but and
again, we would love to share with you some background about our rural program, which honestly I think is frankly a model for Virginia.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm very much aware that in terms of the rural program, the state's interest in acknowledging that there is some assistance that's needed to our non-metropolitan areas, our rural areas. And I think the state has provided some assistance. We've approved the assistance through our approval of the SPR program to a number of PDCs, planning district commissions in Virginia. And the expectation is that for federal funds that go to the state, and for those federal funds that are distributed through a state program to political subdivisions of the Commonwealth of Virginia, speaking in terms of the PDCs, that money is actually going to the PDCs and being used at the PDC discretion. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next section. So I appreciate it. I'm going to turn it back over to Chelsea. Sorry, Chelsea.
Thanks, Ivan. I did read in the agreements that for the 2020 census related to the urbanized area boundaries, that VDOT presented recommendations for the boundaries, or just a set of I guess their projection of what it should be, and then the MPO has, they were provided the opportunity to comment on that as well with other stakeholders. So can you talk a little bit about that process? And in the end, looking at has the MPO's planning boundary changed from, I guess, 2016 when there was the redesignation to through now after consideration of, not consideration, but after a release of the 2020 census?
So the 2020 census, the urban area boundaries, Suffolk is one of those areas in our, which has become its own urban area. And Dale, I'll call on you because I know VDOT gave us the urban area boundaries, and they call it smoothing, right? Right. That's the term they use. So yeah, we have provided feedback on the boundaries, and Dale and her team kind of worked with our stakeholders. We had calls with our Suffolk, for example, was engaged. We also presented to our Transportation Technical Advisory Committee, made sure they were aware, and our feedback was provided to VDOT. Now, did it mean that it changed our boundary, like the official MPA boundary? That hasn't happened, but Dale, do you have anything else to add? But that's a process that we work in close coordination with VDOT and all our stakeholders.
So just very high level, with the 2020 census, and we all recognize there are issues with the 2020 census, especially with the pandemic. Previous to that, our Virginia Beach urbanized area flowed all the way into Suffolk. But with the 2020 census, there was a little sliver where they were kind of separated. So then they said, okay, we're gonna make Suffolk its own urban area and then Virginia Beach. And then as a part of that, there are certain thresholds. And that's what ended up happening is Suffolk was, I think, 3,000 shy of the threshold to be at the same level as the Virginia Beach urban area. So as part of when VDOT coordinated with us is that what should be that smooth boundary when we do our transportation planning. We had recommended to try to stick with the previous urbanized areas and like Pavither said, worked with our locality staff to make sure that we got all of their feedback and then communicated that back to VDOT.
I guess, in the end, those urbanized boundaries, and I guess through VDOT, through the census, did not include Suffolk, but is it correct that this map still represents the planning boundaries for the MPO, that Suffolk is still included?
Yes, Suffolk is still in our MPA boundary.
So was there a change in the MPO boundary between 2016 to now?
No,
Okay.
After Franklin Southampton, we've not changed our MPA boundary.
Okay, thank you for confirming.
And it's kind of confusing at the same time that the census changed their definition of urbanized and urban. areas. And to simplify it, they caused a little bit more confusion. So.
We lost funding.
And I'll go back, speaking regarding the argument, the agreements with Franklin and Southampton County. Those planning agreements did reference a specific project. So that was my question too, on when are the agreements reviewed? Because if I read that, the agreement, like, okay, the Route 58 study was completed. Are there any more projects to complete? What does that look like moving forward? And yeah, those agreements from 2014. So going back to living document, one could review that agreement and think, oh, it's completed. Just something to.
One of these projects, they are huge projects too. So while it's not like, we could throw another $1 million or $100 million on those projects and we'd still have needs. We have John Mahaley has some information that he'd be happy to share on the specific projects. And I'm assuming you're referring to the set aside that was put aside for Franklin Southampton, the $2 million.
Yes, from the beginning to include them in the planning area. Okay, we won't talk about that.
Well,
Right.
maybe not specifically, I just have a printout of that particular project. It has just about everything you need to know. So I'm just gonna get that to you. And then, so there was close to $2.1 million that was set aside for that portion of Franklin and then the portion of Southampton County. Monies were allocated in years 18 and 19, I believe, originally. It's taken a while. There was a study that was completed, but that study was rolled into the one UPC that's listed there for a project that kind of bordered both localities. So they needed to find something that benefited both Franklin and Southampton. So they come up with this project that's near the Love's truck stop, the intersection of 58 and 258. And the project's been going for a while. A lot of study happened. It's been downsized just a little bit. Of the 2.1 million that was allocated, it looks like they're only going to need about $1.7 million for this project. PE's done, right of way's done, and they're entering into construction. It turned more into a safety project, some lighting, some turn lanes, and other improvements to the roadway to make that a safer intersection. It was an area of high accident rate at the time. So the project's ongoing. There's still money on the table. If they came up with additional projects that they would like to put that on, be more than happy to do that. So that's where it stands right now. But it's been a long journey, but it's still active. It's still moving forward. And once again, there's still some money available for that project or other projects, or even the same project. They can add to that, maybe sidewalks, something like that. There's still some things I can do there.
And just real quick to add on to that as a little bit of backstory, because Chelsea may not know, that set aside, there was a reason for the set aside. And Bob, can certainly speak better to this, but with the HRTF funds, Franklin and Southampton has been paying into that for a year, but they weren't part of the TPO, which is something I had brought up in the past. We rectified that. And that set aside was sort of how we took care of, you had paid in to the regional funds, and now we're going to make sure that there is a set aside for those communities that had, contributed to the regional.
No, that's a great explanation. And the localities were a big part of coming to that agreement.
And Federal Highway was too, but it just made me think about, so in terms of HRTAP, it's Southampton County, are the citizens of Southampton County and the citizens of Franklin in its entirety, are they part of the taxing structure of HRTAP, all of the citizens?
Yes.
And again, Federal Highway has worked with the state as well as the MPO on this issue. At the time, we reviewed it as a civil rights matter, civil rights issue. But I'm thinking, with all of the executive orders that exist now that are pertaining to equity, in terms of voting and voting representation, the members of Southampton County and Franklin, the city of Franklin, the voting representation on the MPO does not cover the entire county of Southampton and the city of Franklin. Is that correct? Their voting privilege, I guess, on the board. It's only those that are within the metropolitan planning area boundary.
That's correct, and why that happened that way were the federal requirements and guidelines for what we could include in the MPA based on population density.
Right, and so I just want to, and maybe we'll talk about it later on, but not necessarily approaching it from a voting representation standpoint, but a civil rights and representation standpoint. And that is, if all of the members, all of the citizens within Southampton County and Franklin are being taxed. And when we had this discussion about HRTF funds and the Roads Transportation Accountability Funds, or HRTA funds, the discussions that were taking place between the Secretary of Transportation and our administrator evolved around ensuring that every citizen in the jurisdictions that are being taxed have representation, the same representation at the table with respect to the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization. Now, the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization, as a TMA, has different responsibilities for non-TMAs. But all MPOs have the responsibility, regardless of the funding source, whether or not it's a state, whether or not it's federal, whether or not it's coming from any transportation advisory committee, all MPOs have the responsibility to vote to include projects, regionally significant projects, regardless of how they're funded, in the Transportation Improvement Program and the Long Range Transportation Plan. In terms of representation of the individuals that are being taxed, that are outside the Metropolitan Planning Organization boundary, from a representation standpoint and a civil rights standpoint, to ensure that everyone that's being taxed has a voice at the MPO table. How are the individuals that are outside of the Metropolitan Planning Area boundary, meaning the sphere of influence of the policy board, how are their voices reflected? And I know I'm interested in taking a look at, you said there's agreements between the PDC and the MPO, and I'd be interested to take a look at those agreements just to see how that takes place.
So, we try to be transparent to our communities. And, we know there's an MPA boundary, but we also have member localities. So when we're doing our outreach and we're making regional decisions with transportation, it involves our member localities. So all of Southampton County, they all have a seat at the table. Those board members represent that entire county, not just the sliver that's in our MPO. And same with HRTPO. Franklin and Southampton County are full members. They represent the entire community for both of those
Do
localities.
they understand that when they're voting as a body, not as a jurisdiction? So my question is, you have an agreement that defines the MPO boundary between the governor and the policy board. Again, the boundaries have been approved by the governing policy board, transit fees. My question is, are there agreements between the PDC and the HRTPO that provides for the HRTPO to make decisions beyond what was agreed to between the MPO and the governor, meaning to include the entirety of Southampton and the city of Franklin? And if there are agreements, we'd be interested in taking a look at those. Because in that case, we'd be asking questions, well, how in this case how does that agreement between the PDC and the MPO take precedence over the agreements between the MPO and the governor in terms of the sphere of influence of the MPO?
So the agreements between the HRPDC and the HRTPO, and we have 3 MOAs, MOUs, really relate to the PDC agreeing to give staff support to the HRTPO, the PDC agreeing to be the fiscal agent for the HRTPO, the PDC and TPO mutually agreeing to form a joint personnel and budget committee that do not go into that area. And that would be something we need to discuss with you, Ivan, because as you pointed out, it wouldn't be appropriate for our urbanized MPO to be doing that planning out in rural Southampton.
Right, but you also recognize that you have a percentage of population. And when you think in terms of 13985, in terms of the definition of underserved populations, rural areas, as well as, I think in this case, the city of Franklin, it is majority minority, I believe. Those areas are identified as underserved populations or underserved areas with respect to Executive Order 13985, and considering the fact that Federal Highway Administration was also a partner in looking at this boundary structure, I think we might want to revisit this again if the citizens that are being taxed, a proportion of the citizens that are being taxed are not represented by the elected official on the board. And I'll just say that, we'll have some more discussion probably in areas when we get to the civil rights topic, but I asked if VDOT can take a look at the Office of Civil Rights, can coordinate with the Office of Planning at VDOT to take a look at this and determine whether or not, or assist us in determining whether or not the voices of Southampton, all of the voices of Southampton, and all of the voices of the citizens of the city of Franklin are represented, considering the fact that all of the citizens of both of those jurisdictions are taxed. And the MPO is a considerable part of the decision-making with respect to regional transportation projects, as well as the dollars that they are investing in regional. They are investing in tax law. So if VDOT can, if the Office of Planning to get together to look at that, because like I said, the Federal Highway, we were part of that discussion, and just based on this discussion today and looking at this map, let's take a second look. That's all I'm asking.
Thank you, Ivan. I think we're ready to move in. I know we're behind schedule, but we'll move into the Unified Planning Work Program section.
So arriving with the team's concurrence, we do have Mr. Jeff Rolisky,
Okay.
here to give an overview on UPWP for us.
Sounds good. Thank
We
you.
might have to take a shorter break and maybe move that break maybe to around 10:05 maybe. As I think we have more than 10 minutes worth to discuss. UPWP, we are mindful of the transit partners that will be joining at 10:15. So I do apologize. We will have to shorten the break. We'll try to keep the UPWP and rural work program as concise as possible.
We can certainly find some time, hopefully, to circle back to answer any questions or address any questions that we may have that we can't capture.
We're flexible, so.
Just as we're pulling up the presentation, the Unified Planning Work Program as a requirement of the process is an almost ongoing procedure. This was adopted, the current one for FY25 adopted in May by the board, went into approval on July 1st, start of the new fiscal year, but represents about 6 months of work to pull it together, and then is continuously monitored, likely to be amended and updated during the fiscal year, as well as then moving forward with next year's program. So this is something that involves just about the entire organization. All the principals manage and update the tasks that they coordinate, as well as we draw on help from our transit partners, Suffolk Transit, Williamsburg area, and Hampton Roads Transit, provide input, as well as our state partners. So one document that really encompasses the work of the entire agency, as well as our partners. The structure of the document, we try to outlay all the different transportation planning work in all its forms being taken that will take place during the fiscal year. But then we try to structure it with the same list of description, schedule, and products, the people performing the work, and then the funding levels and sources that go into all that. So even though it provides a very diverse total, it prevents to the public, others looking at it, that common structure across all tasks, across all work, to provide some readability and understanding. Up front in the document each year, we look at planning priorities that we're trying to see in the region as emerging, that have importance to us, but then also the national trends. This year especially, we kind of reversed this process a little bit and went to our board early in January and asked them for their input. Usually this was more of a staff bottom-up coming forward to the board for their comment, but tried to get their input. So you see in the FY25 work program equity at the top of that, and all the work that's come out of the IIJA. But then the other things that are really important in this region, the scenario planning, resilience, sea level rise, continue to be top planning priorities that we try to emphasize throughout the work program. Of course, we have the core activities under the federal law that will have to be mandated as both an MPO and the TMA, the long-range transportation plan, the rural transportation plan, the TIP management that keeps John and his team that I'm part of hopping all the time, the performance management work that Keith's team does, as well as public participation and forming and overlaying everything that goes on at this organization. Within that, then also beyond the core activities, generally in each year in the work program, there are a number of special studies or special emphasis that come out from our planning partners around other research that we can support and advance. So in 2025, you see the list of these activities here. Some have been ongoing for several fiscal years. The river crossings came out of a crisis when we had couple of facilities closed simultaneously, causing congestion, so we have some activity, some funds set aside to help manage against that type of occurrence in the future. Bridge study, always important with all the water we have. Rail crossings, a new effort that started last year, continuing to this year. Passenger rail planning is a unique thing that I think this region's doing, but has done a lot of quality work as passenger rail has grown in importance. And then some specific local requests that are part of this year's work program, reserving right-of-way, underperforming signalized intersections, and some micro transit work research for WADA up around the Williamsburg area will all be advanced this year. Funding, hard to see, but it's about 20, the UPWP is about 20.4 million, broken down two ways by agency. You see HRT with a large share, but most of that, a large share of that is their special transit corridor studies that are being advanced as well.
I have questions about that.
Okay.
Just letting you know.
I'm glad Ray is here. And then by funding source, federal and state, obviously the main funding sources coming to there, but then the local match, our regional funds, and transit agency, the match they provide going forward. So very quickly, that's the overview. It's 170, 80 pages to cover in 6 or 7 slides, but as I said, can only exist with the input and the support of the entire organization as well as our partners, and it's something that is very much always a living document, that we're looking at this all the time through amendment, and then also by December, I'll be haranguing these people for the 26 process to get that started and ready so that we'll be teed up to have the new one approved by next May. So.
Did you want to see the part about the rural program?
Sure. Yeah, okay.
And I'll be quick. I'm not on time. I have 50 slides.
Actually, later she does have 50.
Yeah. All right, and I know we've talked a lot about the rural transportation, but the bottom line is we want to make sure that we're doing a thorough, equitable, and comprehensive rural transportation program for our rural communities. And we take that very seriously. HRPDC and HRTPO, we all know is alphabet soup. And when you go out to the community, it means nothing to them. They want good rural transportation plans. So in terms of our work programs, there we go. All right, so we already talked about this, that our rural transportation work program, we already talked about this in depth, so I won't belabor this. Oh.
So just take the keyboard.
All right. All right, so when we do, in terms of our rural transportation plan oversight and outreach, we do work very closely with our rural localities. And, just a reminder that, it mostly is the city of Franklin and Southampton County, but that we also do some work with Surrey County and Gloucester County outside of the MPA area. The main product that we do produce is the Rural Long Range Transportation Plan, but we help them with other rural transportation issues. VDOT will ask us to do stuff in the rural areas. And then when Keith's department does any of their safety, freight, performance management, bridge condition, congestion, any of that, we're also doing that work in our rural areas. Oversight, we work directly with our localities. We have a rural working group. Previously, before we had the split between the PDC and the TPO, we had a rural TTAC. We have a lot of one-on-one meetings with our locality staff. We do targeted public outreach out there. So we're out in the community, surveys, advertising in their papers, going to their libraries, et cetera. In terms of our rural long-range transportation plan, we've done 3 of them so far. We do keep this up to date, and we're currently updating the rural plan to 2050. We do this in parallel with our urban plan, so we're doing it step by step, which is another reason why it kind of makes sense for us to be doing this under the TPO umbrella, because as we're updating the urban plan, we're doing it for the rural plan, because we see these as seamless. We are truly one region, and we want to make sure we address transportation in that way. We've done some things to enhance our rural transportation planning. We've included them in our regional travel demand model. When we do scenario planning, we are incorporating the rural localities into that area. We look at resiliency, and we make sure any recommendations that we're making align with the state's VTrans midterm needs, so that even though it's not a fiscally constrained plan, it's a useful plan to our rural localities. Some things that we did to enhance our last 2045 long-range transportation plan in the rural areas is we did more MetroQuest visual surveys to make them more public friendly. I already mentioned the scenario planning. We had heard from our rural localities that they were really interested in vulnerability assessments in terms of the riverine flooding and some of those streets that got flooded. So we did some resiliency modeling to be able to make recommendations. And we also enhanced our prioritization tool, which I'll talk about more this afternoon, to be able to prioritize those recommendations in our rural areas. We created some engaging tools for our public. So we have a story map that's kind of going very quickly here on the left. Lots of graphics. That's what you'll find in all of our LRTP is we've tried to make it as public friendly as possible and not be text heavy, and just have a lot of engaging graphics and interactive maps. I've already mentioned that, as part of our congestion freight bridge safety study, that we do that planning also in our rural areas. We help our rural localities with their comprehensive plan updates. Anything that's transportation or land use related, our staff is helping them with those plans. This is not something our boards approve, it's something that the locality board of supervisors approve. We help them with active transportation, also with transit. So we've coordinated and worked on with a consultant for Franklin on their master active transportation plan in coordination with VDOT. And then our own staff did the Southampton County active transportation plan, and these are reflected in those localities' comprehensive plans. We also maintain GIS data for our rural localities and create a lot of that for them. Some other studies that we've done, in Surrey, they asked us PDC staff to help with the subordinates guidelines. I already mentioned the intercity. You had mentioned the Route 58 study earlier. VDOT wants us to go out there once a year and do annual parking lot inventory, so we go out to Surrey County and do that. And then I'm just going to buzz through these real quick in terms of our documentation. So when we were one agency, just the PDC, the rural program was reflected in our UPWP, and then in our various efforts like congestion management and freight, we always had a line item that said we will also be doing this work in our rural areas. With the LRTP, we specifically say we want to make sure that our rural long-range planning aligns with our urban long-range transportation planning, because we don't want them shortchanged. And so we did this in 2007 and 2008, then we split. So the PDC and TPO had 2 different boards. Initially, we only reflected the rural transportation program in the PDC work program for 2009 and 2010. And we got comments from our public that it was confusing. They looked at the TPO work program and said, where is your rural transportation? It wasn't there because it was in the PDC. And what we found was with our public, it wasn't innate for them to go to that PDC work program. So we brought it back to the TPO work program because, again, to the public, it's alphabet soup. Doesn't make sense. So for 12 years, we've reflected this rural work program in the TPO UPWP. And it's been approved each time. We did have a couple of requests there that I've noted that Ivan, you had asked that the PDC board also approved the TPO UPWP. More recently, we had further requests to enhance that coordination with PDC, asking that the PDC adopt a resolution of support with the TPO in regards to the Rural Transportation Program and include the Rural Transportation Program in the PDC work program. We have done this for the last 3 times. So each time we get a suggestion from you all, we're trying to incorporate it. But really, the documentation is not as important to us as the work. Again, we want to make sure that we're doing a thorough rural transportation planning program. And then just to close it off, we're very mindful of the planning emphasis areas. So everything that we're doing out there, we're making sure that we're trying to hit on these as appropriate. So.
And I just have to, if I may, I apologize, to throw in a little plug for Dell's team. For all that for $58,000 a year. So I just need to speak on behalf of Dell and her team. They really are committed to this rural program.
Yeah, and I do. I think we recognize that, and we think that your team is doing an outstanding job. But the issue of the matter related to the combining work programs was discussed as part of our 2008 certification review, where we talked about this topic. We stated it was mentioned by the federal team that while the PDC and MPO are separate organizations, they share the same UPWP that is submitted to FHWA and FTA for approval. So in 2008, we said that this creates a problem for federal highway and federal transit. And I think what we decided to do, consistent with the regulations, is to create a win-win. In that case, the position was, if you're interested in including the rural transportation work program in the UPWP, we have no issue with you including that as information only. Because when you take a look at your UPWP and you look at how, and your definition is consistent with the federal definition, and it's contained in your UPWP, and it states, it means a statement of work identifying the planning priorities and activities to be carried out within the metropolitan planning area. So in terms of accommodating the interest in the activities that you're involved in terms of creating a bigger picture between metropolitan and non-metropolitan, we had stated that in terms of providing that as information only in your UPWP, we would be okay with that. I mean, so that was our position. But the question then becomes is that, again, going back to the SPR program that VDOT has, where VDOT provides federal highways, federal dollars through their SPR program to rural or non-metropolitan areas for the purpose of non-metropolitan planning. And it lists the PDCs that the federal funds are going to, and Hampton Roads PDC is one of those. The questions that we had is that those federal monies are being made available through the SPR program to non-metropolitan areas that are responsible in many cases of the planning district commissions. And does the HRPDC have discretion over the use of those funds? So we'd be interested in taking a closer look at that. I'm not going to belabor it, but if possible, if you can provide us with perhaps maybe the last 5 years of the 4 years of the HRPDC work program, we'd like to take a look at it. But the work program that was submitted for FY 2025, it had HRTPO at the top. And so that's kind of sort of caused some questions as to, well, wait a minute, who's receiving, what organization is receiving the money? Because our understanding was that those funds, those federal funds, were intended to go to the HRPDC for non-metropolitan planning. But again, we thank you and we appreciate, obviously, the work of your staff. But if you can submit the work programs over the past 4 years, let me tell you.
And so we do have separate agreements with the PPO and with PL and the SPRs. There's two separate things for the financial part.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, one very quick comment to add on to that. The other thing is that's interesting. When we were going through the whole process of adding portions of Franklin to Southampton to address the very important issue that you raised, Ivan, in 2016. Now, one of the things that we learned from the two localities was, please don't include all of us because we want, in the MPA, we really need the service from the rural program, right? And Dale, that was a big thing that we heard just in terms of, and again, that's reflective of just the relationship Dale and her team have with those rural localities.
Yeah, but I think just with the IIJA, certainly I think there's a need for us to revisit this, to make sure that the advice and the guidance that the Federal Highway working in coordination with VDOT, working in coordination with the MPO, provided to those localities are benefiting those localities. For example, you've received sub-allocated STP monies over 200,000. We know those monies, can those monies be used outside of the boundary of the MPO or anywhere within the PDC that could perhaps benefit if they were within the boundary? So there's some discussion in these particular pros and cons, and I'm not quite sure whether we had that discussion, full discussion with those jurisdictions. So there's a number of things that I'd like to consider as the VDOT Office of Planning and the Office of Civil Rights takes a look at, this matter. And certainly our office is available to provide any assistance as needed. I'm sorry, I'm gonna.
Thank you, Evan. The question I had for HRT, I think we'll move that to the transit section. One question I wanted to ask, and then we'll take a break and allow those coming from the transit agencies to arrive either in person or virtually. Regarding the fiscal year 2025 UPWP that went out to public comment, many sections did not include funding in the activity item. So we weren't sure if that was intentional or not, or if that was.
The budget wasn't finalized at the time. The budget was in process. So when it was up for approval, the draft documents posted prior, 2 weeks prior to approval, had all the budget financial, but to provide a full, 3+ weeks of comment, the draft UPWP went out without budget information for many of the tasks, because the budget work was still being completed on the other side.
We noticed that where you sent it out for the public and we didn't see any dollar amounts.
No.
We printed that out as draft. What's going on here?
How was that?
The numbers kept shifting, overhead and things, and as you can understand, the budget process is very iterative and wanting to put out correct information. And so until we had firm numbers we could stand on.
Is that something more unique for this year? Not having the budgeted amounts finalized or in time for the draft to be sent out for public comments, or does that happen each year?
I think it's been both. I think the last couple of years, the budget has dragged in. But again, understand there are two opportunities for comment. The budget, when the draft goes out in the beginning of April for comment, but then when we're posting it for approval in May,
okay,
we have all the budget information. So there's the second opportunity to comment when it's out for information. It may not be lacking the full budget detail, but then when we're coming for approval, the full budget, the summary of all the accounts, all funding sources, all amounts, absolutely is part of that document that goes out in advance of both the technical committee and the board meetings in May.
and the MPO would be able to address comments in between when the, I guess, draft to be finalized document of the UPWP is sent out prior to the TTAC and board meetings, prior to the voting and approval. If there are changes, that's something that the MPO would be able to make prior.
We've done our timeline to allow for that.
Okay. Okay, I do notice the time, 10:13. Let's start at 10:18, give ourselves a 5-minute break. If you roll up, let's say 10:20. Okay.
10:18 is a lot.
Is that sufficient? Okay, thank you.